Think of any great villain in cinema. You might be thinking of someone like Joker, Michael Myers, or anyone in between really. But what truly gives them the reputation that they have? What makes a great villain? In almost every movie there is some sort of antagonist, whether it be Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs or Thanos from Avengers. Every good movie needs a good villain to go along with it. But what separates the Heath Ledgers from the Jared Letos? In today's video, we will be analyzing what makes a villain great. We will look into their relationship with the protagonist, power dynamics, backstory, and then finally examine them all together to find out what great villains have in common. With that said, let's get into the first topic, their relationship with the hero. In order to determine what makes great villains, great, we will need to look at what types of relationships they have with the heroes. A villain having a relationship with the main character is important because it makes it that much more impactful during their final showdown. There are countless examples of hero relationships, but I will be talking about 3 relationships that truly lead to a captivating narrative. The first category is a past relationship. This can be former friends who fell out or obsessed fans who turned on the hero after a negative experience. It can be any relation where the villain and the hero used to know each other and are now reuniting. Take Darth Vader, widely regarded as one of the best villains on the big screen, as an example of this. In the first movie, Luke believes that Darth Vader killed his father.
A young Jedi named Darth Vader. He betrayed and murdered your father.
This leads to a dramatic confrontation in Empire Strikes Back that causes a lot of excitement. And when we hear the father reveal, the dynamic between Luke and Vader immediately changes. When the hero and villain have such a close relationship from the past, it leads to compelling struggles and choices that we see throughout the movie. There are also prophetic relationships. These are when the villain and hero don't have a strong relationship, but are bound together by fate. Dynamics where they are destined to meet, leading to even more tension when they finally do. This can lead to a story where the protagonist and antagonist never meet, but still have a faint connection with one another that leads to a compelling storyline. Take Lord Voldemort for example. In the 5th Harry Potter movie, Harry finds out that he and Voldemort are destined to kill each other. This means that every single time Harry and Voldemort meet each other, the audience is on the edge of their seats, absolutely entranced in the film. After all, who knows if this is the scene where the prophecy comes true. And then there's the situational relationship, an association where the villain and hero happen to have the same goal, and both compete to complete it. This leads to an interesting correlation between the protagonist and antagonist, where they're both after the same objective and constantly engage with each other to meet their goals. For example, Gollum in Lord of the Rings. He and the hobbits are both constantly fighting over the One Ring, leading to a constant battle for it. They are only truly enemies when it comes to their lust over the ring, and otherwise they wouldn't have any problems with each other. Overall, the relationship between a hero and villain leads to more engaging encounters that then lead to a more excited audience. It puts another layer of drama to the dynamic that they share, making an enthralling story. But of course, there are plenty of great villains without any personal relationship to the protagonist. But that just means that they more than make up for it in other areas. Even if you don't realize it, almost every great villain has power over the hero. It would be an uninteresting story if the villain could be easily beaten by the hero. If, for example, Thanos didn't have the Infinity Stones or strength and instead was just some random alien with a glove, the story would be so short. The antagonist needs some sort of power over the hero, whether it be direct power or indirect power. Direct power is the more common type of power you'll see in villains. It could be physical, military, or even political strength. Just as long as they have some type of power that you could point to as a reason why they're so powerful. Take King Joffrey in Game of Thrones. He's not particularly strong, but his power as the king makes every scene with him that much more tense. Throughout the show, we see that he uses his power for evil, establishing a precedent that makes the audience worried whenever he shares a scene with a beloved character. And while the heroes may try and stop him, it becomes much harder because of how powerful he is. And then there's Sauron. While he only has a couple minutes of screen time, over the course of the entire trilogy, he still manages to pose a threat to our heroes through his massive armies and military control. As the films go on, the threat of Sauron gets larger and larger, culminating in the final scenes of Return of the King where Sauron is at his most powerful. This leads to the notion that the hobbits won't be able to defeat Sauron, which even the heroes will admit. While direct power can lead to very intense scenes and great moments, nothing is more compelling than a villain with indirect power. This is when the enemy should in no way be as dangerous as they are, but the hero has some sort of psychological problem that they exploit to get away. This dynamic leads to the hero having to go through some major character development before they can defeat the villain. There is no better example of this than Heath Ledger's Joker. Joker has cemented himself as one of the best villains in cinema, which is strange considering how he couldn't very easily overpower Batman in a fight. This is because instead of using his strength to beat him, he uses Batman's no-killing rule to get away with practically anything. He exploits this and uses it against Batman to give himself the advantage in encounters, making Batman question his fundamental rules. Joker doesn't necessarily pose a threat to Batman when they share a scene, but when he gets away he pushes Batman's character to its limits. When creating a villain, it is crucial to make them have more power than the hero at first. This causes the hero to have to try that much harder to defeat him, which makes for an excellent story, which in turn leads to a great villain. If you would like to add another layer of depth to a villain, a backstory could go a long way. It can give extra reasons for an antagonist's motives, which can easily make them more complex. It could even tie them to the main character in some way, making the story a lot more investing. One type of backstory that a villain can have is the former hero backstory. This is when the villain had a deep past as a hero, but something down the road made them change their mind. It can make an antagonist so much more deep, and can even lead to tense standoffs with people they once called friends. It could help contrast the hero and villain, where the hero mirrors the villain, just with the added fact that he uses his powers for good. Anakin Skywalker is a great example of a former hero turned into a villain. And I know I already talked about Darth Vader, but I consider this its own entry. Throughout the Star Wars sequels, we see Anakin slowly be turned to the dark side by Palpatine, becoming more isolated and harsh. This is in great contrast to Luke, who we saw trying his hardest not to be tempted to the dark side, whereas Anakin succumbed to it. Watching him betray what used to be his friends leads to a gut-wrenching pain that is really hard to replicate nowadays. Another, maybe less complex villain who falls into this category is Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face. Man, The Dark Knight really did have some great villains now that I think about it. Anyway, Harvey Dent is constantly seen donating to the city, trying to reduce crime, and overall just being a great guy. This makes his turn to evil super sad because he truly felt like Gotham's savior, even coining him the nickname Gotham's White Knight. This adds another dilemma to Batman, as he wants the idea of Harvey Dent to stay alive, even when he is doing all these terrible things as Two-Face. There are a lot of great examples of fallen hero backstories, some that I'm sure I'll get to in another video. The concept of this villain can do so much for your story, and can greatly deepen the hero and villain of your story.
My daddy with Panther claws in his chest. You ain't the son of a king, you a son of a murderer.
Another type of backstory you could do is a tragic one in which the antagonist had a traumatic experience in their past that gives a reason to why they do evil. This could make the audience or even the hero feel bad for the villain. This can lead to viewers being super invested, praying that the villain is somehow able to be turned good, because they really don't want to see them die. A great example of this is Killmonger, the main antagonist of the Black Panther movie. When we first see him, we see how evil he is and the audience roots against him. But later in the movie we see how Black Panther's dad, previously considered a saint, killed his father when he was young, leaving him to grow up without a father. Suddenly, Killmonger's quest to kill Black Panther seems a lot more justified, albeit still a little invalid. But we see how a backstory can make the audience feel bad for a character, adding complexity to the villain, and henceforth the story. Another example of this is Magneto from the X-Men series. At the very beginning of the first X-Men movie, we see a young Magneto in a concentration camp, being taken away from his family. In the later prequels, we watch Magneto get tested upon, being forced to watch his mother's death. Magneto had everything taken from him, but still decided to fight for good at first. Now that I think about it, Magneto is a great example of both a tragic backstory and former hero backstory. Anyway, knowing how rough Magneto's life was makes the audience have more sympathy towards him despite all the evil he's done, like with all tragic backstories. There are a lot of types of backstories you could give a villain, but these are the best examples I could find. They could go a long way to giving more intricacy to an antagonist, and even protagonist by that logic. But if we truly want to analyze the key to being a good villain, we're gonna have to go a bit deeper. In order to understand what makes a great villain, we're gonna have to take all the antagonists we've looked at so far and compare them. What do they all have in common? And I'm not talking about past power dynamics, relationships, or anything else I've talked about in this video. Those are all more just dressing for villain. But what makes a great villain? Well, to put it simply, a great villain foils the main character. A great villain takes an aspect of the character and uses it for evil. Now, I know that may seem a little out there, but just think about it a little harder. Think of any great villain, and now think of the hero. List out each of their traits side by side, and now compare the two lists. You'll notice that the villain's traits are most likely the exact same traits, but with one key change. I mean, let's look back towards Magneto for example. Magneto's traits are almost exactly the same as Professor X, but with the key difference that he has a fundamental disagreement to how people accept mutants. Anakin is just Luke if he gave into the dark side, Gollum is just Frodo if he became too attracted to the ring, Tom Riddle is just Harry Potter if he used his magic for evil, etc. If you want to make a great villain, you must always start with your hero. A villain isn't always great if it's a good character, but how they contrast and interact with the hero. The Joker wouldn't be nearly as iconic if he didn't make Batman question his morals, Killmonger wouldn't be as good if he didn't make Black Panther question his lineage. Point being that the villain and hero need some sort of dynamic where they are the same, but much different. In conclusion, there are a lot of different elements that contribute to a good villain, but if you want to make a great one, you're gonna have to look at your protagonist for insight. You could have an excellent antagonist, but if none of his traits clash with the hero's, what's the point? A villain is only as good as his correlation to the hero is compelling. With that said, I hope you enjoyed this video and make sure to subscribe. If you are interested in more videos like this, be sure to check out my previous videos about book adaptations in cinema, which should be on the screen now. This is a new channel and chances are you aren't already subscribed, and doing it would mean a lot to me. I hope to have a lot more videos like this, so stay tuned and thanks for watching.